She had already told people what to do if she disappeared. If she didn't show up for work, it was because her ex-husband had killed her. That's what Levern Kelley told her coworkers, according to a police affidavit filed months after her death. On the morning of August 9th, 2025, she didn't show up for work. A coworker went to check on her. The front door was open. Levern Kelley's body was on the porch. What happened to her, and how investigators built a murder case against the man she had once warned others about. That's the story here. Her ex-husband, James Clark, has been charged with her murder. He has pleaded not guilty. And as of August 2026, the case has not gone to trial, and no court has determined what actually happened. So this isn't a story about whether he did it. It's a story about what investigators say they found, how they found it, and how much of that has, and hasn't, been made public. Welcome to the Hidden Chapters, uncovering the truth behind every crime. Before any of that, it's worth spending a few minutes on who Levern Kelley actually was, because it's easy for a case like this to reduce a person to a case file. She doesn't deserve that. Friends and family called her Bernie. She was 53 years old, and for more than a decade she worked as a lab technician at Pen Bay Hospital in Rockport, Maine, part of the Maine Health system. After her death, Maine Health put out a statement. They said everyone who'd had the chance to know her was saddened by what they called her tragic passing. That's a formal, careful kind of sentence, the sort an institution puts out. But it points at something real. She was someone people at that hospital had worked alongside for years. Before Waldoboro, she'd spent about 20 years living in the town of Union, Maine, where she raised her daughter and a younger sister. At some point, she moved to Waldoboro, a small town on Maine's mid-coast. Her house was on Genthner Road, a stretch that runs through a wooded part of town between Duckpuddle Road and Bremen Road, near a spot locals call Eugley Corner. One neighbor described the street to a local TV station as quiet. The kind of place, she said, where nothing like this happens. Kelley's daughter, Amanda Gustafson, spoke to reporters in the days after her mother's death. She set up a fundraiser to help with funeral costs, and in a post on that page, she described her mother as a beautiful person, inside and out, kind and loving to everyone she knew. Within days, that fundraiser had brought in almost $4,000 from people who knew her. That's the version of Levern Kelley that existed before any of this became a police case. A lab technician who didn't miss work. A mother who'd spent 2 decades raising her family in one small town before starting a life in another. Now here's what's documented about the morning everything changed. Saturday, August 9th, 2025. Around 8:25 in the morning, a 911 call came in requesting a wellness check on a woman living on Genthner Road in Waldoboro. Waldoboro police responded, along with deputies from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. According to later reporting on the case, it was a coworker from Pen Bay Laboratories who had gone to check on Kelley after she failed to show up for her shift. Something people who knew her said just didn't happen. That coworker found the front door open. She found Kelley's body on the porch and she called police. Because this was a homicide investigation, Waldoboro Police brought in the Maine State Police Major Crimes Unit, the division that handles homicide cases across most of the state. They took over that same day. Kelley's body was taken to the office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Augusta. An autopsy was performed the next day, Sunday, August 10th. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide. Maine State Police announced that finding publicly. And then, for the most part, they stopped talking. Their statement said there was no known danger to the public. It said the investigation was ongoing. It said no further details were available. That was it for almost a week. A reporter with the Portland Press-Herald tried to get an update from the state police spokesperson later that week and was told there was nothing new to share. A spokesperson for the Maine Attorney General's office, the office that prosecutes homicide cases in the state, said they couldn't comment on the case at all and couldn't even confirm whether a prosecutor had been assigned to it yet. Meanwhile, people in the area were speculating online about who might be responsible. Police wouldn't confirm or deny that they were looking at anyone specific. That silence didn't mean nothing was happening. It meant investigators weren't saying anything yet. And 6 days after Kelley's body was found, what they'd been doing became clear. On Friday, August 15th, 2025, Maine State Police detectives obtained an arrest warrant for a man named James Clark. He was 49 years old, from Damariscotta, a town not far from Waldoboro. The charge was murder. According to police, Clark had left Maine sometime after Kelley's death and traveled south to Florida. To track him down, major crimes detectives worked with the Maine Information and Analysis Center, a state intelligence unit that helps coordinate information across jurisdictions, and with the Volusia County Sheriff's Office in Florida. That same day, they located him at a motel called the Red Carpet Inn in the South Daytona area. Volusia County deputies took him into custody at around 6:40 that evening. Police said the arrest happened without incident. Clark was held there to be extradited back to Maine. That's the piece of the story that turned this from a local homicide investigation into something with a wider reach. An arrest that happened more than 1,000 miles from where the crime was alleged to have occurred. If you want to follow investigations like this from the first clue to the final unanswered question, subscribe to the Hidden Chapters. So who was the man they'd arrested, and what was his connection to Levern Kelley? According to court records, Clark and Kelley had been married, and they divorced in 2023 after what's been described as a short marriage. What makes it relevant is what came after, and, in one case, what came before. In 2013, years before he married Kelley, Clark was convicted of domestic violence assault in Knox County. On its own, that's an old case, but it matters here because of what it connects to later. Then, in June of 2024, after Clark and Kelley had already divorced, he was charged again, this time with domestic violence assault and criminal threatening, and this time Kelley was the person named in the charges. A charge isn't a conviction, and neither of those two specific charges ended in one. In January of 2025, about 7 months before Kelley's death, they were dismissed, and Clark pleaded guilty instead to a single lesser charge: criminal mischief. One of Kelley's friends later told police, according to the affidavit, that she believed Clark was still upset about how that case had ended. Beyond that, the Bangor Daily News, citing court and corrections records, reported that Clark had been in and out of prison multiple times over the years, with more than one assault conviction, and that his most recent case, an OUI and a violation of release conditions from July of 2025, just weeks before Kelley's death, had left him with a 7-month sentence he apparently hadn't yet started serving. There was a documented history that included domestic violence charges involving Kelley, resolved through a lesser plea just months earlier, and a separate, older domestic violence conviction that would become relevant to a different charge entirely, one involving a firearm. What tied all of that together, and what specifically led detectives to Clark, comes from one document, a probable cause affidavit signed by Maine State Police Detective Einar Matson and dated August 15th, 2025, the same day as the arrest warrant. That affidavit became public about a month later, in mid-September. It's important to be precise about what this document is and isn't. It is a sworn statement, written by an investigator, laying out the information that led them to believe there was probable cause for an arrest. It is not a verdict. Nothing in it has been tested through cross-examination in a courtroom. Everything described in it, at this stage, is an allegation. The state's account of events, not an account a court has yet accepted as fact. Here's what it says. On the evening of Thursday, August 7th, according to the affidavit, Kelley was on the phone with someone. During that call, She reportedly said she needed to hang up because she said she saw Clark arriving at her house. Based on available reporting, that's the last documented contact anyone had with her before her body was found 2 mornings later. The affidavit describes what investigators learned once they began talking to people who knew Kelley and Clark. Multiple coworkers told police it was generally known that Kelley and Clark had a relationship and that the relationship was abusive. It was in that context, they said, that Kelley had told them what to do if she didn't show up for work, that it would mean Clark had killed her. Clark's own mother, according to the affidavit, told police about an incident she said she'd witnessed, in which she saw her son hold a gun to Kelley's head. Kelley's sister and friends of Kelley's told investigators they'd heard about that same incident too, secondhand, from Kelley herself, sometime before her death. A friend of Clark's told police that Clark had said he wanted to see Kelley, in his words, drop, and that she'll get hers. If you want to follow cases like this as the evidence comes together, subscribe to our channel. These are allegations contained in a sworn affidavit that investigators used to establish probable cause for an arrest. They have not been tested in a courtroom. No defense response to any of these specific claims has been made public in the sources available. A jury has not heard them, weighed them, or reached a conclusion about them. Now, what about the physical evidence? The kind of thing that often gets treated, in cases like this, as more solid ground than witness accounts? During the autopsy, the medical examiner recovered 12 small-caliber bullets from Kelley's body. That's one of the few specific physical findings that's been reported, and it comes from the same court documents referenced in the affidavit reporting. What hasn't been made public, at least based on the record available, is whether a specific firearm was ever recovered or whether ballistics testing has connected any weapon to those 12 bullets. It's not that investigators have said there's no gun. It's that, publicly, that particular question hasn't been answered at all. Something similar applies to the searches. According to the affidavit reporting, police searched Clark's apartment in Damariscotta and separately, a storage unit he had rented in the same town. Investigators had enough, in their view, to arrest Clark 6 days after Kelley's body was found, and enough, a month after that, for a grand jury to hand down a formal indictment. But some of the evidence you might expect to see discussed publicly in a case like this, a recovered weapon, a ballistics result, the specific findings from the apartment and storage unit searches, simply isn't part of the public record right now. That doesn't mean that evidence doesn't exist. It means it hasn't been disclosed publicly, at least not yet. On September 10th, 2025, a Lincoln County grand jury indicted Clark on 2 counts. The first was intentional or knowing murder, a charge that, under Maine law, carries a sentence of 25 years to life if it results in a conviction. The second was possession of a firearm by a prohibited person. That second charge is where Clark's 2013 domestic violence conviction becomes directly relevant again. The indictment specifically identified that conviction as the prior offense underlying the prohibited person firearm charge. The firearm count is classified as a Class B crime, carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years. On October 3, 2025, Clark appeared in Lincoln County Superior Court in Wiscasset for his arraignment. He pleaded not guilty to both charges, the murder count and the firearm count. He has been held without bail since his arrest in Florida back in August. 2 weeks before that, on September 19th, his defense had filed a motion asking the court to return certain property to him. The kind of routine filing that typically follows a search when a defendant's attorneys argue that some seized items aren't needed as evidence and should be given back. What specific property was involved hasn't been made public. The arrest was over. The indictment had happened. Clark had pleaded not guilty. And then, publicly, the case went quiet. As of August 2026, there is no publicly confirmed trial date. There is no publicly reported ruling on that property motion. There's no reported plea negotiation, no reported new evidence, no reported ballistics result, no reported recovery of a weapon. The Maine judicial branch still lists this as an active, high-profile case and still hosts the public documents online, including the affidavit, indictment, and property motion. But nothing posted there, nothing in the public record or later reporting I could find shows what happened in court after that October arraignment. That leaves a specific set of questions still open. Where is the weapon the 12 bullets came from? Has it even been recovered? Was there ever a ballistics test connecting a specific gun to those bullets? What did investigators find, if anything, when they searched Clark's apartment and the storage unit he'd rented? What evidence will prosecutors ultimately present at trial, and how will the defense respond to the specific claims in that affidavit? And why has the case remained in this pretrial holding pattern for nearly a year? The public record doesn't answer any of those. Criminal cases can sit in a pretrial period for a year or longer for entirely ordinary reasons. The pace of discovery, scheduling, negotiations that stay private until they're finished. By October 2025, James Clark had been arrested, indicted, and had pleaded not guilty. The allegations remain allegations. The evidence that hasn't been made public remains unknown. And beyond the documents, the motions, and the unanswered questions is the person at the center of all of it, Levern Kelley. A woman who went to work, a mother, a sister, a person who had apparently been afraid enough to tell people what to do if she ever stopped showing up. And then, one morning, she didn't. But the public record doesn't reduce Levern Kelley to a case file. She was a lab technician who didn't miss work. She spent 20 years raising her daughter and helping care for her younger sister in one small Maine town before starting over in another. And then,
if this case stayed with you, you're not the only one. And if you're ready for the details most people miss, there's more waiting in the full Hidden Chapters playlist.